I'm going to invite the speakers to start sharing in a moment. Before I do, I just want to say we really prioritize participation in all of our events, and so we are going to have a space for everybody to share their own thoughts after a certain point, which then the speakers will come back to. So what I do is I will invite everybody to now stay silent in chat and just listen and absorb and enjoy, but take notes of things, of ideas or questions you might have. You can even take notes in the chat, but just don't hit enter yet. And at a certain point, we'll invite all of you to share. And the speakers will step back and just listen to all of you and your comments in chat for a few minutes and then respond to them. So if we want to get started, I might invite maybe, who can I invite to start with their first comment? Here we go. We have June. You want to kick us off with some thoughts?
Okay. Sure. So, I mean, I think some of the issues, let me just frame some of the issues. I think part of it is that we want people to feel a sense of belonging, of identity, connection to a larger purpose. But we also want to make sure that our networks are inclusive, that we're having as much diversity in the network as we can. And we want to have pathways for expanding either the network or, you know, what the system changes that we're trying to initiate. And so, you know, I think we really need to think about how is it that we get people that sense of belonging. And I think a lot of that is not just from the network itself, though I think the purpose of a network can really help people feel that sense of belonging without, you know, having too strict of boundaries. But I think also the work groups that you have in a network are places where you maybe do have your boundaries and there's more safety and an opportunity for trust building and connection with others. So I'd love to hear what other people think about, you know, how is it that we balance the need for, you know, belonging and trust building with the importance of having lots of diversity, being inclusive, and being able to share out and have the network grow.
Thanks, June, for kicking us off. And to the rest, you already know this, but I'll also tell it to all of our participants too. We're doing this in dinner table style dialogue. So we're all staying unmuted. We're going to interrupt each other, disagree with each other. Hopefully there will be some conflict, and just pretend we're having a nice chat with a glass of whatever drink you may fancy. So go ahead, whoever wants to jump in and build on what June started us off with.
I'd be happy to build off that. And first of all, thanks, Brendan and everyone else at Hive for hosting this conversation and getting us all together. Yeah, I will just say, I think one of the central questions that we hold in Reamp, so Reamp is a network of about 130 organizations with the shared goal of equitably eliminating greenhouse gas emissions in the Midwest of the United States. And I think one of the central questions we hold around porousness and boundaries is how porous and where should we be porous? Kind of, you know, how porous, where, and when. And we found that depending on context, having more porous boundaries actually sort of counterintuitively allows us to have a crisper sense of our own identity and actually allows us to create sort of more momentum and excitement within our boundaries. But then there are other times where you can push that too far. And if it's just wide open to everyone, then you actually, you know, you lose some of that ability to say, hey, are we all moving in the same direction? So I think some managed porousness we found to be extremely productive in our network.
Gail, and the others, if this is okay, I would build on that. Darius, thanks also, Brendan, thanks for inviting, thanks for everybody being here. Working with IAC in Berlin and building the Bosch Alumni Network, which is a global network of around 8,000 people with very different clusters, regions, impact fields. So in a way, June, you would say a network of networks, or we called it a multi-community network. So you should know that when I try to explain the diversity we already have inside the network, and also to understand my point. What I would like to stress is, Gail, building on what you said, is what if we shift the core metaphor? I have the impression that when we talk about boundaries, we have a spatial and a kind of static metaphor in mind, talking about metaphors. When we talk about networks, let's move towards a living system. The one I really usually use is murmurations. You know, lots of birds, starlings coming together, and when you observe them, so let's find what kind of boundaries we will find them. For sure, not one boundary somewhere in one time. It's a plurality of very different boundaries happening in the network. You have a density here of birds, and then it goes over there. These birds are flying away, coming back. So if we understand networks as a living system, we will understand, as you said, Gail, I think this is very true, to when, where, why, and this has to be understood in a kind of, you know, in time, in space, overlapping living process where, you know, a steering of these boundaries, it's not easy. Also because the boundaries are made by people. This is maybe something we can talk later. It's not a physical boundary. It's us being members of the network.
Thank you, Darius. I just really want to comment on that as well. So hi, everybody. My name is Robyn Whittaker, usually based in South Africa, but at the moment I'm in a room in Devon in the UK with sun streaming in through a beautiful opening in the roof and chasing me around the room. So if I move, please forgive me. That's what's happening. But just, Darius, you know, I think there's something so beautiful about what you've spoken about in terms of the work that most of us, and I'm assuming many people who've dialed in here, are working with, which is networks which are between human beings, between groups of human beings, perhaps between human beings and other animate beings in our system, for those of you who work in the sustainable livelihood spaces, or you know, anything to do with our environment. And that is to really recognize the organicity of what we are talking about, and to recognize that our predisposition is towards control. And so when we talk about boundaries, immediately we start thinking about all of those factors around who sets them, how are they controlled, how are they enforced, and how do we, you know, ensure that people abide by them or don't abide by them? If there aren't enough, how do we not just leak all over the place? But really shifting our thinking to understand what we're talking about really as membranes around our being and our collective being. I think we also have a challenge because we are used to thinking about individuals, ourselves as individuals, and what we're being required to do increasingly, I think, where this world is moving, is towards a re-recognition of ourselves as collectives, as communities, as a multiplicity of beings who are all necessary to each other. And so we battle in terms of our own understanding of our own boundary. Where does our skin end and others begin? And we need to step out of, you know, really a kind of graphic sense of what does a boundary mean. And we also need to step away, and this is something I grapple with, so definitely no expertise, just knowing this fundamental discomfort with a sense of control and a wish and desire to co-create. So personally, I am deeply committed to highly porous borders, but experientially what I see is that, you know, groups self-organize if they are left alone, if they are surrounded, if they are convened around a very strong shared purpose, shared near an intention. So it doesn't have to be a purpose, that's a specific objective, more a way of being and a way of wanting to be together, that somehow boundaries start to develop, that they are really gentle boundaries.
Yes, I think, Robyn, that's a very good place for me to maybe jump in, because I'm fairly new to this sense of joining networks. I mean, from my side, being in the African continent, I'm actually involved in 2 networks now. People think I'm crazy because basically takes up all my time, basically. The African Circular Economy Network, which is, again, that issue of shared purpose, looking to promote an African narrative or context around the circular economy. We're in 40 different countries. We're all basically taking our own interpretation around this idea of circularity and what does it mean. So some people are playing roles of policy, others are actually practitioners, but we have this shared purpose that at the end of the day, the net benefits should be not really just African narrative, but also the African continent must actually benefit from this new reality of circularity, and we must bring our own voice to it. I'm also just recently joined Catalyst 2030. I'm in part of the Africa chapter. So again, this came translated again from that sense of energy that you're talking about, from the circularity grouping. It translated because, again, the purpose, the sense of purpose, because we could all see that you can't do this anything alone really nowadays. Networks or collaboration is now almost as sort of the new business development. So it's a way for transforming at a scale or at a level that you would not be able to do alone. But that sense of, okay, yes, we're self-organizing, but we've been left to our own devices basically to come together where we are. So I really like that swarm example that Darius was talking to, because in essence, because we have this deeper sense of value and what we're trying to achieve, we are finding, being human, we're finding equilibrium where we find it. So I get that sense of balance that he was talking about, moving across like this. So yeah, it's very important. But for me, I think the real issue, if I can, and what has really, really struck me is the importance at the first instance of this issue, the role of the intentionality. How intentional were you, first of all, in the design or the thinking of the network itself, but also there's a sense of some scout, somebody who was basically out there signaling, looking for like-minded beings who will come in. So it people who have that same sense of value inside, and they're looking for people who can add value, but then they, not to take up the same behavioral sense of the network, but they would be in a position whereby the value now will almost reinforce, and that will bring the network to this healthy equilibrium that I was talking about. So this is what I think for me, the last part that Robyn was talking about, and I think June hinted towards, Gail, filters. Yes, the borders are porous, but there's filters, which is, so it's almost like taking out elements which are impure, sort of, but it still leaves the borders or the boundaries almost open. Exactly. So it's actually filtering. Yeah.
Yeah, man, I can see Gail, and not just head nods, but lots of scribbling and writing as well. And I'm sure everybody has lots of things to add. I just want to quickly say this because there's a few people that have just have signed in a bit late. So it's interesting because this conversation is about porous boundaries, and we're hosting both our Enact conference, or Enact Festival, which is a festival across the month of May, all about networks, and Catalyst 2030. We're collaborating with their Catalysing Change Week. So we're cross-posting this in a way, blending our boundaries. For those of you who are new to Catalyst, it's a network people that are trying to kind of advance systems change. And I think kind of what interests me about it is this kind of cross. The idea really stemmed from this idea that there's all these different kind of sub-networks that support social entrepreneurs like Ashoka and Echoing Green, and Catalyst said, why can't we just bring all of us together under a broader umbrella, which I think is really powerful. But I think personally for me, both being active in a lot of these networks, and it's some kind of building on something, Yame, that you were saying, it also tends to kind of pull us in multiple directions. And this is a big tension that I see, as the more open, or the more kind of divided spaces we create, even those open porous spaces, the more we have to choose. We're almost like these different networks are competing for our time, even if they have similar aims. But I'm going to throw it back to all of you, because you,
Brandon, I would disagree. I mean, just to get it into it. I mean, I would disagree in a moment, just to bring it, because yes, I mean, yes, I agree. But there is another perspective on that. You know, this momentum of unifying, of connecting, it's also a momentum of closing the diversity. Whereas I would say, staying with the marmuration element, you know, if we are connected loosely, weakly in a way, and at the same time doing what we think within our environments, I mean, this is the best way also to reach to the others. And coming back to the point, because the echo chamber is maybe also something you know, that would be part of the model you're describing. And I would say, for me, this core sentence for today, how can we be more open? I would like to transform it into a sentence, how can we be more conscious, intentional about building boundaries, understanding where are we building boundaries and where are we allowing self-organization, like Robyn said, and then, you know, allowing groups to build their own boundaries if this is needed. Because I think this distinction between boundaries, openness is one that is there and it will stay. I mean, sorry, sorry, Brian.
But Darius, that's, sorry if I may, Robyn, Darius, that's a very powerful point, because it's all for the repetitive action. Actually, that's what engenders the trust. That's what engenders it. When you start to see almost similar action or values being echoed back to you, that action is actually what engenders the trust that actually now strengthens these loose networks, but it makes them stronger. So it's the trust actually, and comes back to the issue of intentionality as well. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I would really love to build on an analogy that you used, Brendan, around umbrellas. So this umbrellas, and you know, we kind of, again, it's this kind of sort of mechanistic understanding of what we mean by networks, that we need to create an umbrella, and in the umbrella we need spokes, and we need to connect everybody. And I think that there's something in this space, and I do think very esoterically, so please forgive me, I hope everybody will follow, but you know, there's something in this space about appreciating that umbrellas are so useful and provide such wonderful places for respite. But the moment that we can become integrally internally comfortable with stepping out into the rain and understanding that we have a common environmental space that we're operating in, and that we can step under umbrellas for a moment's respite, and then, you know, develop some level of comfort. And this goes to what we've spoken about briefly before, Brendan, which is one's interior boundaries and one's interior state and one's ability, oneself, as a sparrow in the flock of murmurating sparrows, to read the environment and move within it and not feel constrained by, oh, I'm under this umbrella, I can't possibly be under 6 umbrellas, I'm going to have to jump ship and run across to another umbrella, and then, you know, I'll be disloyal to the people under that. You know, there's something about a fluidity of movement which requires us to become comfortable in the rain.
Lovely. I really like that. Yeah. Yeah, I think that this whole thing, I don't think that, you know, the dominant culture out there has trained us to see boundaries and to want boundaries and to long for boundaries as a way of safety and identity. And I think part of what we're all, you know, working on is moving to a place where, you know, we can still have that, but as part of a, you know, a flow of things. And so that we are seeing ourselves, because these boundaries can really separate us from others. They can separate us so much. We feel, you know, we feel so alone if we really focus on those boundaries, when there's all this wonderful connection out there. And so I really encourage people to think of themselves as a network. Stop thinking of yourself as this clear, solid identity. But, you know, you consist of millions of bacteria, viruses in your body. And even how often do we talk or sing to all the bacteria in our body, really communicate, be aware of it. And so that simple exercise of seeing yourself as a network, I think, can help us open to, you know, other ideas about boundaries, new ideas about boundaries that connect us to others, that that allow us to be more nurtured and supported, both by ourselves and by others.
Yeah, I think I like this. I think this is a good point about that boundaries aren't just to sort of keep us separated, but also that boundaries are connective tissue. And I think that's one thing that we have found actually. And one sort of on a practical note in terms of thinking about boundary management within networks, we found that there, you know, to the extent possible, you know, staff or steering committee or whatever sort of bodies you have, sort of official bodies you have within networks, don't really need to be the ones kind of managing boundaries necessarily, but that it's what can be a good practical way to manage boundaries, I think, as a network is for members to be able to navigate that porousness themselves and to be explicit about that. And I think also to be explicit about where that's not really the thing. And that also can provide connective tissue. So I think we have also found that it helps us connect with people to say, no, we're actually not that. And if you are, then there's a way for us to connect. But that way to connect is not like you coming into our space or us coming into your space. So it's like the boundaries can also facilitate connections so long as you have some understanding around them, I think.
Gail, can I ask you to start, and then I'll ask the others. I think in our prep session, I found it very interesting and useful to hear some kind of concrete examples from each of you as to how you've done this kind of boundary spanning work, and particularly what impact it's had. June, I had to laugh to myself because when you spoke about kind of these contrived boundaries, we often talk about network systems changes kind of work as kind of like cultivating gardens. But then I also have this memory of when I was a teenager doing gardening for this old man who basically explained to me how we had to create these boundaries around the garden in order for them to for it to look good, because that's what our eyes like. We like these boundaries around these gardens. They're just kind of like, it just made me laugh to think about how, in a way, gardening has boundaries in itself, and you have to kind of find this balance. But maybe all these metaphors I think are really important, really beautiful. But I also think the practical examples as to how to do this work is really, really helpful. So Gail, if you want to start, and then everyone else just jump in with some other practical examples.
Sure, yeah, I'll try not to get too in the weeds here, but an example I shared during our prep session that I think you're referring to, Brendan, was that, so we're a regional network. We cut across 9 states, but then we also have sort of state-based networks within our network. And we left it up to the members within those states. Hey, do you want to be just for people who are official Reamp members, or do you want to open it up to others in your states? And so some states said, no, we would just want to be for Reamp. And other states said, oh yeah, no, we would want to like bring more people in. And what we found, we did some analysis after a couple of years. And what we found was that in the states where they had said, yeah, we want to bring more people in, even if they're not Reamp members, then everybody sort of in that state, not literally everybody, but the trend in that state was that people were becoming more engaged in Reamp and more excited about Reamp. And that some people were actually joining Reamp. And in the states where they said, no, we just want to be able to be like focused together as Reamp in our state, like those people in the state were becoming less excited about Reamp. They were sort of more inclined to actually leave our network. And so even if, so it was just like having those porous boundaries was a really great benefit for our network overall. People were more excited about Reamp because we became more porous.
Other examples, Darius, maybe.
I might jump in. I keep it short with 4 examples. The first one is June, thanks to you. 10 years ago in your handbook, you wrote about closing triangles. And this is one example how to overcome boundaries within a bigger network. So what we are doing in digital space, we are tagging people. So if somebody's saying, I'm looking for something, it's our role to tag the others, to close the triangles. And with this, to build bridges between communities and programs. On the level of architecture of this multi-community network, what we did, we built very different dimensions It's the programs with a strong belonging, regions where the people start to get in contact with each other. It's clusters, so it's the professional fields they are working in, an area where they connect, and impact fields where they get in action. And here the beauty of self-organization starts. It's like really an offer to the members to reconnect and to start. These are two examples for internal issues, and the external boundaries that is needed because it's a Bosch Foundation, Bosch alumni network, and whoever is in understands I'm part of something, and this is helpful for collaboration. But we have this open boundaries, and one are the projects of the members. So if the members are doing projects and inviting others, those who participated in the projects, they are invited to become part of the network. So this is one vehicle we built. And the second one, with other foundation, we see ourselves as closed networks, and in a purposeful way, we created collaborations with other foundations where we invited what we called the bridge builders to join in. And we really created a space to learn what's the role of a bridge builder between those networks. And I think this is relevant because we are quite good in building capacity for community builders, those inside ones, but it's really a relevant second role to strengthen the bridge builders between networks. So these are examples from our work.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I think there's something there about removing ourselves from the singularity of what a network means. So, and what the roles are. And really earlier on in the chat, I was saying, there are some key vocabularies that we need to build because this is a growing field. And Yame, as you are saying this, you know, the concept of networks in every single space is erupting. Our technological space so facilitates this, but we have no words to articulate what are the different roles. So part of the reason that I know I'm uncomfortable with setting strong boundaries is because I believe that I'm a connector and I'm a bridge builder, and that's a role that kind of comes easily. So I don't want to be restricted to a single space. But in a network format and in a formation, there are so many other roles. So they're conveners, they're hosts, there are those people who do boundary, because boundary has to do with trust. So creating, you know, these intimate spaces where there's high level of trust. And as we build trust in each other and we build trust in ourselves, it becomes easier to step out into other spaces. So really, you know, not trying to nail down, this is the way to do it, but to open up to the perception that connecting, being in connection, being in communication, being in respect and trust and collaborative spaces is the goal. And there are a lot of different ways to facilitate that is helpful. So this is part of the process we are engaged in, is finding words that we share, and hopefully not words that become, you know, buzzwords, because as soon as that happens, you know, they start losing their meaning. But words that genuinely we take the time to reflect on. We can appreciate that when you use a particular word, it may mean something different to me, but we take time with each other to study the intention of what we're trying to achieve together.
Yeah, maybe that's a good place for me to jump in. I mean, for anyone listening in, I'd really remind them to just take a step back and really appreciate a bit of what Darius and Gail were talking to. In that process where you are enabling almost the bridge builders to do what they do so that they can not really bring people in, but they can be that healthy exchange. It's almost like it's flushing out the system. It's almost flushing out the system and it's making it healthier. So then what it's doing is revitalizing, it's bringing in ideas, but then you're cross-pollinating. So any toxins or anything probably are going out. There's a healthy, fresh. So it's almost like a osmosis or a membrane that's actually now making this system healthier. But the interesting thing about in that exchange is that if you are really there and you are plugged into not only who you are and what you're trying to achieve, and you're doing that almost internal work to appreciate all this, what is actually happening is that you become a lot more aware. You yourself are becoming a lot more engaged. You're becoming a lot more, it's almost like a form of personal and professional development and growth that's happening there. And you're becoming a little bit more active. Maybe you're becoming a little bit more courageous. Something sparks. So even your ability or your capacity to grow and to deliver and to play that active role of actually meaningfully participate, taking more responsibility or trying different things that you probably were not ready for, that starts to happen almost. I wouldn't say it happens naturally, but I like Darius said something about consciousness earlier. There's a strong amount of work required, and sometimes it's not even intentional. It just happens. If you are lucky enough to be conscious at that time, and you realize, oh my goodness, that's what you see it and you're aware, it actually sparks something, and it's a very magical experience. But I think for anyone else, from my side, really, what is actually really, really important also to take away would be that what I've noticed is that it's almost like you needed to have done hard work before to reach a place where you are aware, you are ready. We call it going to the school of hard knocks. You've suffered, you've strived, but all those networks or those things were always there. It's just, were you really aware? Were you ready to receive? And sometimes you never get there, but the thing is, there's a certain degree of awareness that's required, and then that's when all of a sudden, for some reason, something kicks in where you start seeking out certain things. And fortunately, with technology, the tagging that Darius was talking about, you're tagging, you're finding information, you're finding a report, you're finding a way to a place, and finally something happens one day when you find the network and you realize, oh, this was always where I was meant to be going. But when you started off, it wasn't like you intentionally seek. Something was causing you to seek this place or this network out. So I guess what I'm really saying is that there's a certain degree of exploration of self that's needed, and then while you're in it, that ability to share and participate purposefully. Now, when you arrive, it's also to participate, but also to receive. And that's that osmosis that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, sorry.
Yame, I think it sums up the kind of the complexity of this conversation, I think, in your words. Thanks for sharing. We're going to take a pause, as was promised in the beginning. So speakers will mute, and they'll be listening to you for about 5 minutes. Hopefully, if we can manage to make it work with some nice background music. And what we invite you to do as participants is just to take some time to write down any questions, any reflections, anything that resonated with you, anything you're struggling with, anything at all in chat. Literally, you're going to have 5 minutes to do this. We see that Karen has already prepared hers. So some of you, if you're ahead and you have some things already prepared, just press enter. If you want to take some time to write, that's okay, because we have this amount of time here for you to write. And as you're doing that, just a second, yeah. We'll put it back on in a second. The speakers are just going to absorb what you're writing, and then we'll restart in about 3 to 4 minutes from now. And at that point, the speakers will reflect on things that they read. So enjoy the music, enjoy your silent time, and take some time to reflect. have any more questions that you want to bring in, feel free to keep writing in chat, but I'm going to invite our panelists to unmute again, all of you, and anybody just jump in and start. Again, we're building on audience questions or reactions or thoughts. So Darius, since you unmuted first, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I have two notions, and now Renato came in with the notion around power and boundaries, and this is really the topic I want to come, and also connecting with what was said before about the collection of system, internal, external, and also somebody who raised the question, who sets the boundaries, which is a connection with this power question. And I think we all, in our words, in a very different way, try to show our perspective on networks, where we should be aware of the power we are holding also as network builders, those who give the money to support networks. And I think to be aware of those power relations, there's only one way to deal with that. And I come back to Robyn's, when Robyn said we are used to work with a control mechanism. And at that moment, I had this impression, what's the opposite of control? And it's this dance when we are at a great party and the party starts and we are all dancing, dancing with somebody in a duo, dancing in a group, dancing with others, getting out, this dance is something that I would see as a different mechanism to the control aspects that is sometimes visible when we also talk about boundaries in singularities. Let's stop that. There is a multitude and happening at all times. And as we said, boundaries are helpful as a tissue metaphor. I like this a lot, connecting us, allowing safe spaces, and at the same time also dividing us from others. And if this dividing from others is also built around a power constellation, I think this is the moment where at least I would say, okay, this is not my intention, my perspective of why we build networks. And let me say the last sentence, Brendan, you started with networks will be the new normal. Why? Because the world outside is a multitude of systems, is a cross connections of system, multi-temporalities, tipping points coming. And I strongly believe that networks is the new organization form to tackle with the complexity of the world outside. And this is why we need this permanent of boundary here, not, and this dance of boundaries.
But I think that we have to explicitly address power in networks. It's just so deeply ingrained in us. We just are not aware of all the privilege that some of us have, so much more than others, all the hidden ways that power mentality, that we're putting everything into a power relationship. And unless we explicitly work on that, and I know particularly in the US, it's been really important to deal with racism, because that's where that's the deepest and most distressing place that power has manifested itself in really horrible ways. And so really encourage people that that so much more can happen in terms of this dance if we explicitly address power both within ourselves and within our network, within our organizations.
I think this is just essential. And I think the reference earlier going back to intent, self-examination, courage, really rigorous examination. So what is the intent? And it's tough. So as those of us who love networks love it, but we love this kind of fluidity, but we hate it when we encounter control. So Karen, your point about the fact it's so hard to find funders, there are some out there. It's part of the advocacy piece. It's part of the vocabulary about why this is so powerful. But the willingness to self-examine that, okay, so I hold a position where I convene stuff. What is my intent? And it can be quite painful to recognize that actually there's something happening here that just by virtue of positionality or lack of understanding or lack of really taking time to reflect and to reflect together, there's an experience that's happening that feels like power, and power is a real thing. It's no good to sort of say we're a no power network. We need to understand the dynamics of that power, and we need to be willing to examine them together, and to talk about it. What's the experience?
Might just add, I think self-reflection, yes, 100%. And also, I think accountability to the membership and then to the larger movement. And so, for example, one of the things we do is we survey our members every year, like, hey, are these the right boundaries? And when I'm talking about boundaries, I'm talking about our values and goals more so than like, is this structure properly, so like, are these the right boundaries, and are these, also, how are you feeling? Do you feel like this is a fair place? And if there's groups of people who feel that it's not a fair place, then that is actually telling us something probably about the boundaries. So for example, we used to have a lot of young people who never really got heard. And that tells us something, right? Like, why is it that these young people aren't heard in our space? Maybe we need more young people in our space, for example.
I think for me, that would be a good place to jump in. I saw a question, I think from Jessica down there, talking about culture and international. For me, both of my current networks, that's what we're experiencing: circularity and also this systems change for social enterprises. It's actually happening. We're global. We're literally dealing with people absolutely everywhere on the planet. So it's one of those things that we've had to be very careful. I think you find that both are more almost decentralized, but they still have these little sort of like mechanisms that they're using to keep the sense of, we like structure. We like the fact that there's a weekly meeting, or we like that we're going to have this workshop, but we do all those things. But the reality of what's happening in between, we're the ones really just jumping up with ideas based on what we're doing, and we cross-pollinate. We ask ourselves questions. We see, is this something that we value? Is this something that we're going to derive value from? Does it make sense from what we really are saying? This is our mission, or what we're trying to achieve this year, what we're trying to go, our goals this time, a work plan. So the work plan is almost co-created on the fly, basically, and but it's still fitting in what you'd ordinarily sense, like a company or a corporation saying, this is our work plan, this is how we're going to measure this. So it almost comes about as a result, but it wasn't like starting off whereby somebody said, look, let's see what is our 3-year strategy looking like, what is the next quarter, what is we're co-creating it, but just because of how we are relating to each other, and what we find that, okay, looking at this, so that we don't stretch ourselves too far, looking at what is achievable, look at this thing, how can we come together and collaborate to make this thing happen? So these are, for, I think this is Jessica, those are real examples of what's happening from, and I hope that answers your cultural internationality. But there's two things June and Gail have actually, Gail was talking to young people, June was talking to racism. What you will find when you are at this scale, I mean, in terms of for us, across the whole continent of Africa, dealing with people on another thing, there's people from minority groups, there's people from indigenous backgrounds, there's hidden tribal trauma, or how they have been trained to deal with each other. So when they come, they come with this almost, I would call it this, you must remember, like they come with this almost this avatar. They come into this thing almost with an avatar, which is that thing is the thing that's controlling them. So they look normal like you and I, but you have to remember that the other people have dealt with other issues previously in the history and the timeline, or wherever they are, their cultural context and everything else. So I wouldn't say this is happening consciously to be aware of this, but it's one of those things that you find yourself really having to stay calm, and actually having to just not trying to be docile or not insensitive, but you really have to come in respect. Be very, I think the word I'm looking for is humility. There's a sense of humility there that you don't know what somebody else has gone through. So you need to really be calm. And this is why also Karen's point about the learnings that's happening. I think that touches on Robyn's point about the vocabulary. These things are very difficult. There's not always time for reflection. You're so busy with what you're busy with, but these are all very important points. And as you can see, Darius is saying it's coming at you all the time, and you really have to. I think the word is equilibrium. You have to find some sense of equilibrium. Yeah.
Robyn, do you want to drop a
Thank you,
lesson?
Brendan. Thank you. Yes, and I do apologize about needing to jump off. I've got a beautiful session on Ubuntu leadership with some incredible participants. So I'm so sorry to jump off a little earlier than the session finishes. So, Yame, just building on what you're saying and also on some of the conversations around the funding paradigms and around the system shift, I do think that where we are now is we're actually sitting on the breaking edge of a wave of systems change. But the thing with that is that, you have sort of early adopters, you have the people who get it, the people who want it to happen, and then you have a whole back current and a backlash and a pullback. And it's quite difficult to navigate that. So, there's a real need for developing your own sense of equilibrium when you operate in this place. Because if you're going to surf a wave, you need to be able, to maintain your balance, to not mind if you fall off and get bashed up once or twice, to be courageous enough to climb back, hopefully to find a group of other surfers that can encourage you. But it isn't a short game, this. And in fact, exactly this network, this kind of ecosystemic approach is completely counterintuitive for our received wisdom from the whole industrial era about short-termism, quarterly reporting, at the best annual reporting. And it's the reason that the funding paradigm is so hard to change as well, because we really are looking at short-term wins that are reportable. So we have to figure out how to navigate that, because it's a reality. It's lovely to think about if everybody could just get that, these changes take time to evolve, but they don't. So how do we navigate that? How do we have the humility to recognize it's not about speaking to those who have the same mind? It's about creating bridges and pathways and connections and really seeing human beings, because we all respond. Actually, as humans, we really respond to this concept of we are connected, but it's hard to put it into our logical framework. We have to find ways to bridge that.
Thanks, Robyn.
So thank you all. Please forgive me. And it was an amazing conversation.
And the hour goes by so fast.
It really does.
I'm going to invite Yen to reshare the screen. And in the last 3 minutes, what we're actually going to ask everyone to do, including the panelists, is to write in chat a bit about what inspired you that you might actually take forward. What did you hear today that you particularly that you found interesting or motivating, or something that was new to you that you might actually practically turn into an action? And it could be something small, like I'm going to work with, talk about this with one of my funders, or I'm going to test a boundary spanning concept, or whatever it might be. But that's how we like to close these sessions, is 3 minutes of just hearing from everybody about what concretely we might be able to do moving forward as individuals. And the reason, so as you're typing your comments, the reason we want that is because this is the idea is this is the beginning. We think that these conversations around networks don't happen enough, despite how important they are to all of this work. And our hope is that over the coming months, we will have this whole festival across the month of May, which I encourage you to go on to the website that Ian shared in the comments and look at it, is all about kind of bringing out new mindsets and practices that can transform our work. And we hope that actually leads to behavior change, as well as sparking new connections and new ideas and potentially new collaborations. And we have a network that we run for people that are running networks, since this work is so hard, that we invite anyone to join, which was also shared in in the chat, and it's on the screen here. But just in general, we actually want to start to foster a community of people who are thinking about this work to continue thinking. So again, I see in the chat, there's already a whole bunch of ideas coming through about kind of the concept of multiplicity, or already receiving some connections, which is great. The kind of serving members around boundaries. Something for myself is, I think, thinking about how funders can be more involved in the processes of the networks, because I think funders are part of the power holders and the controllers, but also potentially the boundary spanners. And I think, Gail, your comment about understanding that potentially youth are excluded, we could think about how funders in a way are excluded because there are these divides. And so how can we also span those boundaries of bringing in those people who have the power and control to be more engaged with the other people in the network, is something that I want to take forward. So thanks so much to everybody. This was an amazing conversation. Again, we'll be following up with everybody beyond this with some kind of beyond the festival, with some actions for moving forward. But in the meantime, I want to give a big thanks to the speakers. Anybody who wasn't able to attend will be sharing all of this kind of these events online anyway. So this is just the beginning. In the meantime, I just invite you to just, as you're signing off, to unmute, since we haven't heard a lot of voices yet verbally. Just unmute and give us a goodbye as you're signing off. And that's how I really like it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, have a blessed day. Have a blessed day.
Thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
all.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thanks again, Brendan. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
June, Darius, hope we cross paths again.
That's right. Yes.
Thanks a
Take
lot.
care.
Thanks a lot. See you soon, hopefully.